Who you are is not your doubts. I've had so many doubts over the years, and I have them, well, when was the last one? About 2 minutes before I started recording this podcast. But who you are is not your doubts. You are not that negative talk track that is in your head that's telling you you don't have what it takes, that's telling you you're going to fail. You are so much more than that. And often we think, oh, I need to get rid of the doubts before I start. I need to get rid of the doubts before I can pursue my dream, before I can meet the right person, before I can be who I want to be. And I say BS to that. I say, actually, you need to acknowledge the doubts and then choose the action you're going to take. And do not give the power to your doubts to decide what you will do. Because your doubt, it is just a form of fear wanting you to play safe and to play small and to dilute down your dreams and to silence your voice and to hold back from doing the very thing that you know in your heart of hearts that you are most called to do, that you need to do. And to close that courage gap between where you are and where you want to be, between who you are and who you want to be. Your doubts don't only play you small, they also shortchange everybody else. Welcome to the Live Brave podcast. I'm Margie Warrell. Here you'll learn how to live and lead with more courage in an increasingly anxious world. If you'd love to bring your bravest self to your biggest challenges and the boldest vision for your life, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Live Brave podcast. When my dad was about 5 years old, his parents moved out of the pub that they were managing in a small town called Bruthen in Victoria, Australia, and moved into a corrugated iron shed by the water's edge in a little place called Nungurna. And Dad lived in that shed with his mum and his dad, his brother and his sister, though she went off to boarding school, I think a little early into that time. But they lived in that shed that had no floor. When the tide came in, that was their floor. And they slept in sacks, like big potato sacks, like hammocks that were hung from the ceiling. The walls were simply corrugated iron. My Nana had a little pot stove that was just on the beach right beside the shed. There was no running water. There was no heating. There was no cooling. There was no shower. There was no toilet, bathroom. But my dad recalls those days as being among the happiest of his whole life. And he said it wasn't until he was 11 or 12 that he had his first pair of shoes when he went off to boarding school himself in Sale, about an hour away, with his brother Bob. I just returned home from a beautiful time with my dad, who lives now in a little home just up the hill, about 1 minute walk from that shed. And we sat there drinking many cups of tea, looking out at the lake, looking down at the shed, watching the sailboats go by, watching people walk their dogs. It's not a very busy area. And it really brought me home to not only my dad's roots, but also to my own. Dad moved up to a farm that his parents bought when he was about 12, a dairy farm. And at the time, it was covered in a lot of trees, and Dad spent a lot of his teenage years and early adult years clearing the land to make a dairy farm, to make it viable. It was a lot of manual labor, and he spent nearly 50 years then milking cows, raising his 7 kids. Yes, as I'm big sister, number 2 of the 7 children, and just making a life. And I remember when I was probably in my 20s or 30s, Dad sharing with me how over the years he would just wonder, is this the life I was supposed to live? am I living my purpose? And my dad and my mom, very strong Christian faith. And Dad said he would often say to God, God, is this my purpose? To be getting up every morning, sending the dog out to round up the cows, to, just make ends meet. And he said it wasn't until he was in his 60s that he came to realize that maybe that had been his purpose. A lot of people today talk about purpose, and that's good because I believe that we're all here for a purpose. No matter what your childhood experience, no matter what your talents, no matter where you find yourself, you are here for a purpose. And so often, though, we get caught up thinking that our purpose is somewhere else, that we're not living our purpose. And the reason I share with you my dad's early childhood experiences living in that shed, we called it the red shed. It was apparently painted all red in the beginning. And then the local environmental people said, hey, it's not blending in with the environment. You need to paint it green. So Dad painted the sides green to keep them happy, but kept the red roof on it, and hence it's called the red shed still. But Dad's early childhood, much of his adult life, really his whole adult life, was not one living some big, high and mighty purpose, finding the cure for cancer, doing something that we think of is laudable and noble in a big way. He was simply showing up, being as loving as he could in small ways. It makes me think of a quote that I've loved for years by Mother Teresa, that we're not all called to do great things, but we're all able to do small things with great love. And as I think about my own life, starting out for the first 18 years on that farm, which felt very humble, but it was also very grounding. And my life since, the challenges that I've dealt with, the opportunities I've had, opportunities my dad never could have imagined for himself. Going overseas. So he didn't go overseas till he was in his 60s. We got him a passport to visit me when I was living in Papua New Guinea. The life that I've had the blessing and opportunity to live is beyond what he could have comprehended. As when we were kids going on a family holiday, if we went on a car trip and changed from Victoria, that's our home state, to another state, Dad, we'd all get out of the car and we would take a family photo under the sign that said, welcome to New South Wales, or welcome to South Australia, the biggest one, welcome to Queensland. So, our lives can be very different from the lives that we might have imagined, or the lives our parents could even remotely have imagined. And sometimes we do ourselves a profound disservice because we think our lives are supposed to be very different than the lives we're living. And actually, the greatest purpose for our lives is actually found in how we show up for the life that we have. How we choose to connect with other humans, the other people that are all on their path, living their purpose. How we choose to deal with the difficulties of our life, our pain, our hardship, and the love that we bring, particularly to the people who press our buttons the most, or in the moments when it's easy to get distracted, to find ourselves in a little pity party. So I want to just share with you today 5 truths that I have to help you make peace with your path, make peace with your pain, and make peace with your purpose in life, even if it's not the one that you're thinking might be your purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not here to do great things. That doesn't mean that you're not called to something bigger than maybe where you find yourself now. but to make peace with where you are right now. Scott Peck was a psychiatrist and wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. And it was a book that I was given in my early 20s, actually not my early 20s, in my mid 20s while living in Papua New Guinea. And I remember starkly the opening lines of that book. And it's that life is difficult, and that when we accept that life is difficult, it becomes less difficult. The fact is, life isn't meant to all line up perfectly with your plans. And thank goodness for that, because imagine if everything you'd ever wanted had gone your way. Imagine if every request you'd ever made, every dream you'd ever had, had just landed perfectly for you. I mean, you might have married that person that you had a massive crush on when you were 16 or 18, because at that point in your life, you thought that's what was going to be perfect. But you don't know how things are supposed to work in your life. You don't know actually what is the greatest gift for you. Sometimes the hardest experiences of our lives don't get a title until much later. While I was in Australia, I was invited to do an interview for ABC Radio. ABC is Australian Broadcasting Commission, kind of maybe like NPR here in the United States, and they have a podcast called Conversations. And I had a wonderful conversation with Sarah, who really dived deep into my childhood. And she had me thinking about things I hadn't thought about for a long time. And one of the stories that I shared was about my long journey with bulimia, which I developed at about the age of 13 and through till I was about 26. So I suffered with this eating disorder for 13 years. And I share the journey of that in that podcast, and I'll make sure I pop a link to that podcast conversation in the show notes here. But as I shared with Sarah, it is in hindsight that I can see that experience of dealing with disordered eating. Yes, I had an eating disorder that had a name, bulimia, but a lot of women and men, but a lot of women I've met over the years also have an unhealthy, disordered relationship with food, sometimes stuck in destructive eating patterns, have body dysmorphia. Certainly, we don't love the bodies that we've been given and can be hypercritical of them and wish we had another body type, which is such a disservice to us and to the gift of our bodies. But as I shared that journey, it had me just circling back to something I learned years ago, is that it is in being humbled by our problems and humbled in sometimes the lack of willpower we might feel we have, in the addictions we have, that we discover things about ourselves, that we grow, that we learn. And I'm really grateful for having had that eating disorder, because I would not have grown into who I am had I not been humbled by what was, in a sense, an addictive behavioral pattern. I had an addiction, and it was a 12-step program that helped me heal and rise above it. And so many other experiences, the armed robbery that I shared about in that podcast, which I've written about in my books, losing my first baby at 19 weeks pregnant, 5 miscarriages in total. All of them I can look at now and have some measure of gratitude, because it was in those difficulties that I was forced to grow, that I was forced to assimilate new experiences into my mental maps of how life's meant to be, and grow my capacity to just meet life where it's at, versus the life that I want to have just to meet the life that I have. And the same for you. So it is by accepting and embracing your struggles that you can rise above them with less stress, with more resilience, and emerge out the other side of them with a deepened connection to the gift of life itself and to your ability to just deal with life and embrace all the notes, not just the middle octave, but all the notes of your life, because we cannot experience joy in its fullest measure if we are blocking out and trying to dumb down, dilute, numb ourselves from the hard experiences. So embrace your difficulties. Number 2, who you are is not your doubts. I've had so many doubts over the years, and I have them, when was the last one? About 2 minutes before I started recording this podcast. But who you are is not your doubts. You are not that negative talk track that is in your head that's telling you you don't have what it takes, that's telling you you're going to fail. You are so much more than that. And often we think, I need to get rid of the doubts before I start. I need to get rid of the doubts before I can pursue my dream, before I can meet the right person, before I can be who I want to be. And I say BS to that. I say, actually, you need to acknowledge the doubts and then choose the action you're going to take. And do not give the power to your doubts to decide what you will do. Because your doubt, it is just a form of fear wanting you to play safe and to play small and to dilute down your dreams and to silence your voice and to hold back from doing the very thing that you know in your heart of hearts that you are most called to do, that you need to do. And to close that courage gap between where you are and where you want to be, between who you are and who you want to be. Your doubts don't only play you small, they also shortchange everybody else of who it is that you can be. And I know this to be true because of all the times I have let my doubts win. There's been many, but of course, there's been many when I have done the very thing that my doubts are screaming at me not to do. If you read The Courage Gap, you'll remember the story I share about the time that I saw Oprah's best friend, Gayle King, and I was desperate to go up to her and say, here's a copy of my book. I would love you to give this to your bestie, Oprah. But my doubts were so loud. I stood there frozen. Will I, won't I? Will I, won't I? And the doubts were like, no, don't do it. She's going to be so annoyed by you. You're just intruding on her personal space. You're going to make an idiot of yourself. She's going to throw the book away. She doesn't want to know about you. And I remember watching her just walk right past me to the elevator and being so mad at myself afterwards. And then wind forward the clock to when I was finishing up writing The Courage Gap. And I was in a pickle with an immigration issue, and I won't go into the details. And I prayed, dear God, I need a miracle to get this piece of paper that will allow me to leave the country. I could leave the country, but I couldn't get back into the United States without this piece of paper. It was going to take, the Immigration Service said 14 months to give me this piece of paper called a travel parole. But again, I don't want to bore you with the tedious details of what it is to be an immigrant to the United States. And I walked into my bar class and there was the wife of the President of the United States. And the only space left to work out was right beside her. I'm not going to go through all of the details of that story except to say I remember my doubts going, do not walk out after her where she left. Do not make an idiot of yourself. And I was like, damn it, I am not going to let the doubts win. And as I share in that story in the book, and I think I've shared this in a previous podcast, I walked out there. I felt like a freaking idiot. I spoke to her Secret Service, and within 4 days, I had a call from the Immigration Service saying, we are going to be processing your travel parole, plus an email from the White House. This stuff only happened because I didn't give power to my doubts. I defied my doubt, and I did the very thing that my doubts were saying don't do. There is enormous power in risking making a fool of yourself. There is enormous power in defying your self-doubts. Don't let your self-doubts play you small, because too often they do. Number 3, be willing to reinvent yourself and peel off the labels that are confining who it is you're on your way to becoming. When I was a kid, my dad used to call me Bumblefoot. That's because I was never particularly coordinated, not overly athletic. He used to say, you got 2 left feet, Margaret Mary. And it was in my 30s before I realized I actually can run. No, I was not meant for Olympic glory, but I had the ability to run. And it was in my 50s, I think it was my 54th, 55th birthday, that I ran the New York City Marathon. There's obviously a whole lot of steps outside my comfort zone in between that. And I did another podcast on running that marathon. I'll make sure that is also in the show notes if you want to hear my journey to becoming a marathon runner. But so often we are hemmed in by the identity we've created for ourselves that is partially assembled by labels that we apply to ourselves, and maybe labels that other people have stuck on us, perhaps even lovingly, but which hem us in. Now, labels are great for jam jars and poison containers, but when you apply them to yourself, they can create this psychological barrier that you don't let yourself cross. Oh, I'm just not an organized person. I'm just not a morning person. I'm just not a disciplined person. Oh, I'm not someone who can just go out and meet people at networking functions. I'm shy. I'm timid. I'm cautious. I'm a control freak. I'm a perfectionist. Whatever it is that is hemming you in, be willing to peel off that label. Who could you be if you no longer identified yourself the way you've been identifying yourself? Now, I don't mean that you don't have character traits and personality preferences. I am a woman. I am not a night owl. There's things about me that are true. Yes, they're truths, but that doesn't mean at times I can't stay up late, just as I used to think, oh, I can't get up super early. You know what? I can get up super early. I just had to learn to set my alarm early so I could fit exercise in before I started my day as life got busier and I had more kids. And same for you. You can do anything that you want to do if you're willing to rewrite the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. Oh, I'm too old to start a business. Oh, I'm too old to go back to study. Oh, I mean, the stories we tell ourselves hem us in. And as I wrote about honestly, I've written about probably in every book I've written, you create your stories and then your story creates you. And so often we're living inside stories with labels attached to ourselves, attached to other people that hem us in. So be careful about the labels that you put on yourself and be willing to peel them off. Be willing to grow into a bigger version of yourself. Be willing to reinvent yourself. Just because you've always done things a certain way, just because you've always described yourself a certain way, doesn't mean you have to stay that way. And Nen once said, and then the day arrived that the risk of remaining tight inside the bud became greater than the risk it took to blossom. Maybe what's getting in your way are the stories that you've been telling yourself, the labels you've been putting on yourself, the armor that you've created to protect yourself. Maybe that is actually becoming a straitjacket that's keeping you from growing, that's keeping you from evolving, that's keeping you from being a bigger, bolder, more self-expressed version of who it is you have it within you to become. Number 4, be more ambitious than you think you have the right to be. So often we tell ourselves that we don't have what it takes to do what inspires us the most. But let me tell you this, you have everything it takes to pursue the boldest vision for your life. Everything it takes to pursue the vision. And whether or not you achieve it is actually way less important than the courage you bring to trying. So a few years back, Andrew was coming up to a big birthday and I said, hey, what would you like to do for your birthday? And he said, well, it'd be really cool to go on a safari in Africa. I've always wanted to do that. And our son Ben said, look, a safari would be great, but I think it'd be like really cool if we climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? Even more cool than a safari? He put together a PowerPoint presentation. It had Rocky soundtrack music. He had researched everything about Mount Kilimanjaro. It is the rooftop of Africa, one of the 7 summits of the world. He presented it to the family. He did a brilliant job at enrolling, well, at least me in this vision. And in the end, we're like, let's do it. Let's go and climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And at the time, our 4 kids were all teenagers. I have shared this story before, so if you've heard it, bear with me. And certainly if you've seen one of my speeches, I sometimes share this in keynotes. But yeah, we set off for Tanzania, and a few people that knew us and know anything about mountain climbing said, Kilimanjaro is really high. It's nearly 20,000 feet. That's coming up towards 7,000 meters. It's pretty high. They said, and teenagers, could be kind of difficult. You might find you don't all make it. We were living at sea level at the time. So yeah, we were climbing kind of sand dunes occasionally, not mountains. I had actually climbed several mountains, as had Andrew. We had done Mount Wilhelm when we lived in Papua New Guinea. So we knew what the altitude can do to the body. We know that it's not always about fitness. Even when I climbed Mount Wilhelm in Papua New Guinea, it was some of the guys that did it with us who were like army jocks, super fit guys. They actually had to bail out because of the altitude. So Andrew and I were aware just because you're fit doesn't mean you get to the top of the mountain. And we were not super fit. But we set off, and on that summit day, I remember we got up super early. Within 30 minutes, my youngest son, Matt, was throwing up the oatmeal we'd had for breakfast. Within another 30 minutes, Ben was throwing up. I had a pounding headache, felt sick, so nauseous. And 6 hours in, I threw up, and it was the hardest yakka, most grueling day. But after 9 extremely grueling hours, walking extremely slowly up that mountain, it's like shale, it's like moon rock. It was tough. We got to the top. And we had a photo taken, and in the photo, it was the only time we smiled all day. But I share that with you because we were more ambitious than we had the right to be. But we were committed as a family to try and do this for Dad's 50th birthday. Like, this would be something we would look back on. And we did do it. Was it hard? It was bloody hard. Did I want to give up about a dozen times that day? But there is so much from the collective commitment we had, lifting each other up emotionally and literally pulling each other up when we'd have breaks. And as that oxygen grew thinner and thinner. But we did it. I think about pretty much every book I've written. Look, would I love to have a book that was in every bookstore in America? Yeah, of course I would. Have I succeeded in that? Absolutely not. I have not succeeded in that. But when I die one day, I'm going to go, I gave it my best shot. And I've also grown a lot in the process of trying to heed the call on my heart. And likewise for you, whatever it is that inspires you, whether it's climbing a mountain, whether it's writing a book, whether it's building a business, raising your family, whatever it is, running a marathon, whatever it is for you, if it inspires you to do it, then do it. And whether or not you achieve the goal is less important than the fact that you're in pursuit of it, because it's not about the goal. It's about who you become by giving your best in the pursuit of it. So be more ambitious than you have the right to be. Dial up your daring and dare to do the very things that, yes, may seem almost impossible to you, because for any goal to be worthwhile, it needs to be one that's stretching you. It's one that's growing you. And if it was easy to do, it truly wouldn't be worth doing. So make your goals worthy of you. And number 5, Yes, this is a long podcast, but number 5 is to make peace with your unfinished self. This is the heart of the 5th principle in the courage gap. And I know I did a whole podcast on this, and it's probably my biggest growth edge myself because how easy is it to get down on ourselves when we fall short, when we don't measure up to the person that we want to be, when those parts of us that are insecure, that are mean, that are greedy, that are jealous, that are envious, that are lazy, all of those things, and that exists within all of us, get the better of us. That's going to happen to all of us throughout our lives. But you can never better yourself by beating up on yourself. You can never grow and pick yourself up if you're shaming yourself for being the fallible human being that you are and that every other human on this planet is. So make peace with your unfinished self, with the rough draft that you are, because we will all fall short. And just because you fall short doesn't mean you're not worthy. Just because you fail to get the outcomes you want, because your fear gets the better of you, because that insecure 7-year-old that lives inside of you sometimes overtakes you and leaves you saying things, doing things that you know aren't reflective of who it is you want to be and who you want to become. Pour a bit of love into those parts of you. Extend grace inward. Self-compassion is a conduit to discovering within ourselves the full measure of our courage, to growing into who it is that we have been created to be, that who God created us to be. And for me, my faith is such an important part of my journey, knowing that God created me just the way I am. And he knows what a shit show that can sometimes look like. And yet he's still calling me to do these things. So therefore, maybe all of the doubts and all of the insecurities and all of my faults and all my foibles and flaws are actually part of me living my purpose, part of me being who it is that I'm supposed to be in the world, not in the absence of those parts, not about me being perfect, but in the presence of them. And the same for you. All of the parts of you that aren't who you think you're supposed to be maybe are exactly how you can be expressing your purpose and living into your potential. Your problems, your faults and your failings are all part of your journey. And so trust that you have everything it takes to pick yourself back up and to really express yourself fully as the flawsome human that you are. And I love that word, flawsome. And in my book, Make Your Mark, I talk about embracing your full flawsomeness. And I hope you will do just that. Because if you were perfect, you wouldn't be. And it's by owning your rough edges, it's by owning your whole story that you give others something to hold on to. So not only do you need to forgive your unfinished self and really embrace all those rough edges and those failings, but have the courage to share them with others. Share where you struggle, share where you fall down, because all of us are on our own journeys, all struggling. And just because you look around at people and go, oh my God, they have it so together, that person, oh, they just seem to have it so together all the time. You have no idea what they're struggling with under the surface. I talked about this in my last podcast on running your own best race, because we all have our own struggles. We all have our own crosses to bear. We all have our own insecurities, our own hurts to heal. And when you can just own what you struggle with, you give other people permission to really own what they're struggling with and allows you to connect with them in a far more meaningful way. So here we are, the end of this podcast. It's longer than I set it out to be, but I'm finishing up this series, this Courage Work series. I'm not sure when I'm starting my next series, and so I wanted to just share those stories with you now, and I hope they are helpful for you. And of course, if you haven't taken the time to rate and review this podcast, I hope you will, because it would just make a difference. It makes a difference to the algorithms. So thank you very much for your support. If you would like me to come back with another series, I'd love to hear from you. You are welcome to drop me an email at margie@margiewarrell.com. I also invite you to connect with me on social media, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, where else am I? Everywhere. And of course, feel free to sign up for my newsletter on my website, margiewarrell.com as well, because I will be continuing to be sending those out so they land in your inbox. Thank you. God bless you on your journey. And remember that you have everything inside you to meet every moment that life presents, and that your path is your purpose. And it is in embracing the full spectrum of what it is to be human that you get to live your life with the joy that is meant for you and to be a greater source of joy for others too. Take care.